Welcome to the first webinar of the Future of Work series, shifting focus from workplace to workforce in 2021. I am Aniket Sudhanshu and I lead the research practice for Future of Work at Nasscom. To give you all a context, in March 2020, when nationwide lockdown was announced, the organizations had to quickly think on their feet to adapt to the new changes and ensure business continuity. This led to a wide-scale digital adoption, resulting in acceleration of future of work trends. Among all the aspects of future of work, the focus was primarily on the workplace aspect as organizations prioritized the shift from physical to virtual workspaces. Fast forward a year with the second wave of COVID, an organization focus is now on workforce and the new set of priorities and focus areas such as employee health and safety and employee engagement has emerged. The objective of the webinar is to closely analyze the shift from workplace to workforce in the 2021 in the context of future of work. To discuss this, we have a distinguished panel today. Our first panelist is Mr. B. N. Thammaiah, Managing Director and Country Head for PERSOLKELLY India. Mr. Thammaiah has 26 years of experience and in his current role oversees the entire operations of providing workforce solution with key focus on permanent and temporary staffing solution. Mr. Thammaiah, welcome.
Thank
Our
you very
second
much.
panelist, Mr. Anirban Gupta, who is the associate partner at Aon Consulting. He has a rich industry experience of over 15 years in areas ranging from compensation budgeting to market intelligence. Mr. Anirban, welcome.
Thank you.
So let me start with you, Anirban. In terms of your perspective of how the second wave is impacting or likely to impact the workforce.
Sure. I think one thing that's become very clear is the first wave for a lot of people seemed distant. It wasn't. It didn't hit home as hard as the second wave had. I think most of us, as we look around, friends, family members who unfortunately have lost their life to COVID as well. I think the second wave has come a lot close to home, and I think organizations, as they responded to it, I think showed a remarkable amount of resilience in terms of being able to step in where the public infrastructure was failing. So whether it be helping employees with oxygen supplies, real-time bed availability, to conducting vaccinations for the employees to ensure peace of mind and well-being. I think the second wave, India has really stepped up and shown the amount of support it can provide and take care of the employees in the longer run.
I'll come to Mr. Thammaiah. What are your thoughts on the workforce impact in the second wave?
Yeah, I agree with Anirban, and we all know that if you possibly look at in the first wave, we used to kind of hear either read news or hear in distant circles, but this has really brought closer to close ones being affected. And I think from a employee mindset, I would say in the first wave, employees to think I am okay, I am taking certain precautions, and let me take care of work. Possibly in the second wave, the survival mode came in a little more closer, and the question mark, am I okay? Let me take care of the survival aspects first, and possibly somewhere in the employee's mind also, work possibly came second close. Otherwise, it's always on top of the mind. And I totally agree, including the managers stepped up, organizations stepped up and said, yes, you're important first, and we can always figure out work. And I think the response also was very responsive, I would say. Even if you look at productivity, possibly after a very long time, organizations dependent on trust and leadership skills rather than possibly better softwares and better processes. That was always there as a backbone. But the trust factor where the employees, the managers, the management came kind of together and trusted each other to run the process. I think that was one of the characters which is slightly different from the first, where people largely also continue to depend. And I think finally, I think mental wellness is one aspect which is something which was very, very different. I think we might talk about that as we go along.
Sure, certainly. So Anirban, in terms of the impact, in terms of organizations that are facing, right? What are the key workforce-related challenges that you see are now, coming into the forefront, and that will probably dominate the priorities and the concern areas, at least in the 2021 or in the short run?
Yeah, I think it's important, and Mr. Thammaiah spoke about it. I think mental illness is one, but I think before that, we just need to step back and the dark side of workforce, a workforce that potentially wasn't working in environments they're familiar with. I think one of the things we saw, not only I think in each of our own organizations, but at industry at large, where burnout rates started to increase. There was at the beginning hyper leaders going out of the way to make sure that people are logging the hours. I think sooner rather than later, I think the broader sense that prevailed is that we are not meant to work in isolated environments for long periods of time. We miss the social fabric of organizations, and we were unable to switch off. And I think as Indians, we potentially are going through that a lot more because we've been not able to switch off, switch on very well, right? The workday for us continues. I think we're on an environment where the workday is now never ending. We also have to understand that unlike potentially the more mature markets, our homes aren't meant for us. And it's fair for leadership to say, we have the infrastructure to work from home. I think rank and file, your engineers, the people who are entry level of careers, their infrastructures aren't meant to work from home. I think what we I think, before you look at what is the impact on the workforce right now, we need to step back to understand what the last year and a half have been like, right? And I think the dark side of COVID and the digital and the dispersed workplace has been the fact that workplace related stress is on the increase. There isn't a single client I talk to who doesn't talk about how the need for mental wellness is increasing in the organization. Employees are burning out. And if you look at even a lag indicator of burnout, which is attrition across the technology space is going up, right? You can attribute some of it to increased demand, but the fact that people in an uncertain environment like this are looking for other opportunities is a signal to say they're trying to get away from things that are causing dissonance to them. Now, if you look at what the second waves meant, I think second wave has accelerated the dark side a bit more. Most of our teams got impacted by COVID. All of us had times when you had a portion of the team out and the remainder of the team was picking up that work. And while Mr. Thammaiah is right, I think trust played an important role. Teams made sure that client deliverables were being met, but I think it's come at the cost of the team in the sense of the amount of workload they've picked up over the last couple of months. And my fear is that rate of burnout is now going to start increasing. Right? I think there's a certain set of fatigue that's set in with COVID. We aren't meant to work in confined environments like this, especially some of the younger workforce that don't have infrastructure that enables them to operate remotely for long periods of time. I think all of that is going to start compounding into both mental health challenges, into being people being able to cope with this entire virtual working. But I think there's going to be tangible business impact in terms of greater churn, greater flux in that workforce, which we now need to start getting ready for.
So from what I understand from this is that, while many of these physical and IT related challenges were kind of addressed last year, they continue to be a recurring theme because of the new employees coming in, or because, deployment hasn't happened as fast as we would have liked. So Mr. Thammaiah, I'll get your inputs here in terms of, do you agree with all of these assessments? Do you have any other areas where you feel, there is challenges that need to be addressed? And the second part is, how do we address that? How can organizations actually address these challenges as we move forward?
Right. I completely agree with Anirban. I think well touched upon on the mental wellness part, and I think organizations have stepped up there to even support in a very different way. They've brought in professionals, mental wellness or even otherwise wellness professionals to support employees in many of the spaces. Coming to possibly in a very related area is about a unique workspace challenge which the managers are facing, because at some point in time, manager has kind of teams which are split, work processes which have changed, and a lot is on her plate to handle at this point in time, and not too much of preparation for something as significant change as this as ever prepared a manager today. And I think managers are uniquely placed somehow, I feel, or project leaders and specialists are uniquely placed to feel this stress and the VUCA world, and possibly that's where some bit of how policies and procedures are possibly married to this situation or aligned to this situation could be possible solution, is the way I kind of see. And I think the one of the ways is to kind of possibly look at how is the organization and how are people in the organization, employees, supporting all of this. And maybe I can talk a little more about the policies and procedures and around that. Would you like me to?
Sure, please.
Okay, great. So from a perspective of policies and procedures, I think it's a means to an end, meaning, all these policies and procedure exist because there is an outcome which the organization is looking for. And the outcomes and the situation where all of these were put together was possibly not accounting so much of a turbulence. Possibly some, yeah, we all have BCPs and stuff, but this is the first time beyond the stress test on a real-time basis, the BCP is being tested, the policy is being tested, anything that was laid down as a status quo is being tested. And I think it's a time where organization, be it the HR heads, the business heads, have to kind of look up into those policies and possibly ask themselves that question of how is this policy serving the organization? How is this procedure serving the organization, employee, stakeholder, and client? And possibly not try to look at it in a way saying, how do we adjust with this policy? Or say somebody, the last thing anybody would want to say at this point in time to an employee or to a stakeholder is saying, this is our policy. And, because that may not be any more relevant to that effect. So I think from a perspective of there are various ways of looking at how do we look at possible solutions, because everything is so evolving. There is no standard solution at this point in time. I think it all starts with that, being very, very flexible in the way we look at solutions and possibly think there are many solutions and not just one best solution, and being equitable. Simple things like healthcare, right? Some of the organizations could have possibly health insurance which is differently structured for different levels or type of employees, but we all now know it might have sounded well sometime back, but now if there is a patient in the hospital and the bills possibly they would have to pay, there is no differentiation. In a way, COVID is a leveler of sorts, right? So from that perspective, I think all the HRs have first now looked up saying it's not, many have gone beyond saying the level of coverage is not okay or the expanse of coverage is not okay. Uh, Companies started realizing that employee wellness doesn't stop at employee wellness. It also extends to the wellness of their family members. And if a family member is away, it's all hands on deck, right? Your employee is not available until the family member issue is sorted out. And so there is various perspective which has kind of come in, and I think there's no one particular solution. Possibly empowerment is one way of looking at be it the policy procedures and saying the calls or decisions need not always be taken at the top. It needs to be moved down, and you got to trust your people. If this is not the time to trust, there won't be a better time to trust people, and trust them with their judgment, obviously you can give them a range, you can have a stop loss and stuff like that, saying this is how far I can go. But I think a manager or a leader, team leader, is best situated to take a decision today. There is no time to even go to the business end, possibly sometimes. I'm talking on both sides, be it wellness, be it business, responses, and all of that. So I think flexibility, empowerment, I think these are some of the areas which we can possibly look at to serve the situation right now.
Sure, absolutely. And I think, many of the things that you mentioned is kind of very similar to the kind of analysis that we did with Eon last year when we, surveyed with the organizations in terms of their priority. And training their managers to lead virtual team emerged as one of the key areas where organizations are focusing. Anirban, yeah, go ahead, please.
I'll just add a couple of things, and I think as we look at this portion, there's another thing we need to start, if not worrying about, thinking about. I think to Mr. Thammaiah's point, couldn't agree more, right? That today, I think if I look at how the more traditional organizations have reacted to this, I think the response rates have been found wanting, right? A lot of it has been post facto reactive measures that don't seem to serve for the situation you're in. But having said that, I think as you get to that more proactive, more agile organization, there has to be a certain degree of democratization of data, right? So today, if I need to know where I can get a hospital, if that's sitting with somebody in the HR team, the amount of time it takes to go all the way up and come all the way down is crucial time loss, right? So I think more and more as I look at it, and should we think about the third wave, and God forbid if that were to happen, how do you decentralize data? How do you democratize data so that, to Mr. Thammaiah's point, the line manager, the person on the ground is empowered to go do the right thing for the colleague, for the family, etc. Right? I think organizations will have to rethink of how they've delivered their HR programs, how they delivered employee benefits, wellness, which is usually centralized top down, and think of a more federated structure in which to enable consumption of that and not wait for process to kick in, right? I think process in environments like this is a bad word, right? What you need is spirit, what you need is flexibility. I think last thing anybody wants to hear when they or their family members are in peril is, here is the process. Right? I think that's a big thing for a lot of organizations to think about, because as especially in the Indian technology space, as organizations have built for size, they've built complexity, and they've built methods to streamline process. This is a test of that, right? And I think the ones that will walk away with favorable employee perception that the organization stood by their side and helped them will be the ones that can federate that very quickly. Right. So I think that's on that. I think the other, and I just go back to the point you were making to say, what are the challenges that are coming up? A lot of clients that I work with today during COVID grew. And if you look at technology, the technology industry, it's a fairly common thing that happened, right? That as COVID hit the Western world, demand for technology services out of India started increasing. And one of the things I see and potentially gets amplified in at least the early stage ecosystem is that as they're getting in newer people, they've never experienced the office. They've never experienced leaders. They've never experienced culture. And therefore, they are doing their job, but the leaders look at it to say assimilation is a problem. They are not hyphenized yet to our ways of work. They still behave like they're in a different organization, and it's amplified in a early stage startup type environment because the teams are smaller. But the same thing's happening without doubt in very large organizations, right? And therefore, what that means is that is a ticking time bomb for organizations if you're ingesting in fair amounts of talent and unable to assimilate that. And for everything that we say about virtual assimilation, onboarding, etc., at the end of the day, we're humans, right? The human to human contact's important, understanding the rituals is important, speaking the language is important. And if I look at it slightly long term, I think that's a challenge organizations will have to deal with over a period of time in terms of the talent that's coming into the organization today.
Sure, absolutely. And I think, some of these aspects in terms of employee engagement, along with other issues such as, data privacy and cybersecurity, is all kind of driving a shift towards hybrid work models where organizations are kind of looking at a mix of both in terms of how we can enable virtual and take the benefits of the system, while at the same time, use the office spaces or the physical interactions to kind of enforce the organization culture that is, kind of being lost. In fact, today only we have released a report on CEO survey report that has highlighted that around 92% of the organizations are looking at incorporating hybrid work models even beyond the pandemic. So, on that end, the challenge here is, in a way that hybrid work models is very nuanced in a way, right? Because it might mean different things to different individuals. For someone, it might mean a higher participation of gig workforce. For some, it might mean a rotational basis that everyone comes to office on a certain number of days. Whereas for other organization, it might just mean a very distributed setup with a certain percentage of employees that actually never come to office, and there are different shades in between, right? So I'll come to you, Anirban, first in terms of how do you see these models evolving in the Indian context, at least in the short to medium run, say 2021, 2022.
Yeah, and that's an interesting question, right? And if you went back potentially a year, the amount of noise in the ecosystem about we are never returning to work, if you look at it, that's now become will be hybrid, right? And give it some time, it potentially will be more physical, but will give you flexibility, right? So I think as you go through the model, go through this journey, there is obviously the immediate realization to say we are not stuck in traffic anymore. We are we have more time to do stuff, and then go back to, oh, this is never ending. I have to cook and clean while I work and stuff like that, right? So I think some of these are phases. You will go through that as we go through this. Let me touch on the gig one for a second, right? And then I'll come to how I see potentially some of this evolve. I think the gig model is an interesting one, right? Because fundamentally, and along with Nasscom, we did a survey a few months back on how technology and outsourcing companies are looking at leveraging the gig model, what areas, etc. And fundamentally, what we're seeing is that the push that will happen on the gig side will be through what you would call either not a strategic priority or where demand is variable, right? So anything that's core, so whether that be R&D, product management, core development, etc., organizations very clear that they're going to keep it close to their chest. Things that they see ancillary, things that they see as add-on cost, are places where they're thinking of exploring a gig model because it gives you a variable cost model, right? And honestly, and I think we're in peculiar times, but if you look back historically, you will see rise of gig workers during economic turmoil, fall of gig workers when the economy is booming, right? And I know there's a lot of noise about how the future all of us will do gigs, etc. I think history is a great teacher of what works, and I'm not denying that the model is not here to stay. I am potentially debating that the degree of adoption that a lot of people are putting out may not happen because there are strategic differentiators of organizations. There are things that are close to strategy. If the talent you had, I had access to as well, what makes you and I different, right? So you need to think of gig from that angle. I think there are fair amount of non-strategic variable demand jobs that can move that way. But things that are core to organizations, I think will stay there because that's what differentiation is, right? Uh, if I look at the other thing, right, to say, okay, for the regular employee, what does the future look like? I think one thing that we've taken away, and I think it's potentially taught a lot of us that is virtual work can happen. There is, and if you look at organizations that were multinationals based out of India, I think they adapted that, embraced that much earlier than potentially organizations that were grown organically in India. I think across the board there is cognizance to say virtual work doesn't mean people are not working. That model's been tested. It's been proven to say you can drive as much productivity, if not higher, and the person doesn't need to be in office. I honestly believe the world will be hybrid in the sense that potentially organizations will start giving employees that choice of how many days do you want to come in versus how many days do you want to work from home, knowing that productivity doesn't suffer. I look at it to say, this entire push from towards a virtual workforce or a workforce that work from home also had financial angles built in into cost of real estate, etc. But I think the cost of culture will overpower the cost of real estate. Organizations will want to ingrain culture in employees, bring them into experience the work environment, bring them into bond, to innovate with team members, to collaborate with team members, while giving flexibility for them to work from home when their personal situation desires. An interesting client I was talking to a few days back runs a BPO organization, and what they're thinking of is almost building a hub and spoke model. So they'll have a central office where you can come in for collaboration, come in for meetings, come in for technology support, etc. But your day-to-day job can happen out of home, right? And that got me thinking to say maybe that's the model, right? That there are for certain things you come into office to experience culture, collaboration, team members, etc. But the rest of it you were working virtually because that helps you be the most productive over a longer period of time.
So, Mr. Thammaiah, I'll come to you in terms of your perspective, in terms of, how do you see the hybrid work models evolving in the Indian context, in the short to medium term?
Right. I think that's a good question. I agree with Anirban as well there. The way I see it is largely, at least in my mind, from whatever I've spoken to my clients, there are two aspects how the clients are looking at. One is a local hybrid, and second is the work from anywhere kind of model. And both have its own distinctive advantages and possibly risks, if I may say, which accompany that. Uh, Local hybrid is obviously gives and takes a little bit less. I mean, it's less risky. It's more of a rotation of uh, seats and stuff. You might require a little lesser office and space, and you save a little bit on that. On the flip side, managerial challenges and the culture. And one of the earlier points which Anirban touched on, how do you manage if there is a large intake of newer employees? And especially what we say from a younger stage or entry level, from that makes the entire intake also complex, right? Compared to both as its own challenges. And work from anywhere obviously gives a lot more benefits, especially from it kind of gives a employee or employer, hire from anywhere, work from anywhere kind of a thing. There is cost aspects which get sometimes arbitraged. The richness of talent you get, maybe if there is somebody who finds a certain talent only in Bangalore, but now possibly could have an office somewhere else and still hire from Bangalore, right? So those aspects are there, and the flip side is going to be culture and a lot of other aspects which come along with that. One of the aspects which I guess while this will continue undoubtedly, and each organization have to have their own portion as to say what works for them and what doesn't, because I believe organization in its depth are kind of unique to themselves, especially from the culture, right? Tracking matrices becomes a problem. So everything you want you might not be able to do because you have to track matrices, and how do you do it is very different when you have people in the office versus. And one of the challenges I think is again human challenge end of the day, as the theme comes up. 70% of communication is non-verbal, right? There's so many smaller nuances that works out. All this in a long run would take a toll unless we figure out newer ways of managing it. And right now, I think we might not have all the answers, but that's something to be seen. I mean, I would definitely, on a lighter note, I would definitely like if I am a board meeting, something like a augmented reality, where I can see everybody at least for a moment. I would feel I do have my colleagues in the same room. I don't know what kind of solutions would come out, what kind of aspect, but yes, it's going to stay. But each organization would have to find their right mix. And gig is again interesting. I just pick up because much of it I agree with Anirban. I just want to pick up one aspect that, especially the Gen X and possibly one more generation after that, uh, Gig did not come naturally to them, to their mindset, right? For that demography, maybe to a much younger millennials, and possibly after that, even the digital natives and all. Maybe a little bit, they would say, yeah, gig makes a lot of sense. I'm talking from a candidate perspective or employee perspective. Now, what COVID has brought in is that it's like a forced prototype for even those, Gen X who never thought of that, have now thought working from home is manageable. It's possibly it's not great, it's not very bad, but it's manageable, and that's one step closer being to possibly gig or on a contractual workforce kind of aspect, or dispersed workforce. So I think that's one forced habit or a prototype which has kind of brought in. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but that's something which people have experienced and might have brought them an inch closer to being a little more adaptable. By itself, this they would have never taken this plunge. Yeah, I think that's where I would leave it.
So I'll just take the question to the next level in terms of going beyond the hybrid work models in terms of the broader umbrella of what we call future of work. What are the other shifts or trends that you kind of envision that are likely to either get likely emerging or either getting accelerated as a result of, say, second wave or the continued impact of COVID that we see today? Mr. Thammaiah.
Sure. I think one very crux to all of this is the employee value proposition. I think that's one of the aspects which we kind of need to look at, because uh, there is a little bit of mindset change in the employee from what it was earlier to now. And it also differs, I'm sure many of your researchers also will show that this change possibly is different in different demographies, age group, and of employees and all of that. But employee value proposition is something right now people might be looking a little more closer to stability than adventurism, right? A little more flexibility, definitely so. I think, again, if you bring a little bit of diversity into discussion here, that's another huge difference. Flexibility to a young mother versus somebody else means very, very different. And whoever is in the workforce, it might not be the same. And also in a situation where, let's say, and end of the day, many men are helping the women folk at home. Both are employed, both are working in a certain demography, but still uh, the requests are not very strange when the women folk of the house definitely take time off for cooking right in the middle of the day or something like that, especially if they have a little nursing baby or something like that, which they have to take care. So flexibility, connect this to if somebody is diversity sensitive, because that has been a huge boom during this different diverse group bringing in different strength during this COVID situation. So if all of this, look at it, flexibility is one, and the employee value proposition on management presence. Somewhere I would say in some organization there has been extremely good management presence in terms of the being present, talking, open, possibly saying we don't have all the answers, but we are here. We will get the answers together. And sadly, in certain situations, management has been presence has been uh, slightly found wanting, so as to say, because possibly they've gone into a bit of shock or whichever way. So I think the employee value proposition is attached to all of this, and this is where employee would see and choose how they want to be associated with a certain company. And especially when, let's say, the IT industry is looking for more talent, diverse talent, cutting edge talent, this becomes very, very important in terms of looking at that. And if I may add another point here, I think the employee value proposition is extremely closely related to the company branding. And these are not two different things, because end of the day we all realize the employees are the best brand ambassadors in not so much words as what they speak good about the company, but the way they show up at the client's place or deliver the work at the client's place. And this doesn't just come because they love their work, and it's because they are overall engaged, and they get overall engaged because the EVP is kind of to a certain extent taken care of. I think from that perspective, I think this is something which we need to kind of look at, and how is the EVP changing from the past to what it is today, and how should possibly everybody in the company, especially the HR as well as the business heads as well as the management, need to see how this gets catered.
Absolutely. Very, very important points. Anirban, your perspective, please.
I think I agree with most of this. I look at this to say, as we emerge out of this, I think we will emerge as a set of companies that won the battle for perception versus a set of companies that lost. Right? And just look at LinkedIn. I think there is enough evidence of the organizations that are proactive, the organizations that are going out of their way, the amount of publicity is a bad word, amount of goodwill they're generating. No amount of branding campaign can get you that. Right? And if you look at that, the ones, and I'm not saying they did it for the branding, they did it absolutely out of concern for their workforce, concern for health and safety, but they will reap benefits, right? If I look at the one takeaway from the pandemic is that as you build an organization, how do you trust and empower more? Right? And typically as organizations become large, power tends to centralize. You tend to create process, like I said, process of everything, decision making is controlled. I think this pandemic, if I look at it from a future of work perspective, whether you're hybrid or not, whether you're gig or not, I think fundamentally the organization that will come out stronger would have realized that you need to decentralize, uncomplicate, get decisions closer to the ground. And like Mr. Thammaiah said, not just employee decisions, business decisions closer to the ground, right? Like if you're waiting for your BCP process to kick in before you can tell a client what you're going to do, you will be in trouble, right? The frontline business leader driving that business needs to know that he or she is empowered to go do what's right for the client. I think this pandemic, from a work perspective, has taught us that we don't have the time always for data to go all the way up and from there it will come out of the ground. So I think managerial maturity, leadership capability, really critical areas of focus as you go forward. That for me is going to be, I think, the core accelerator of future work. How do you uncomplicate the organization? How do you quicken decision making? How do you empower your leaders to take real-time decisions on the ground?
Absolutely. And I think, as you rightly mentioned, right, the distributed and, the democratization of the entire process that we currently see is likely to be a very, very important trend as we go forward, right? I'll just shift the focus and, get your closing thoughts in terms of how do you see, from an organizational perspective, we have spoken, discussed a lot. What does it mean from a workforce perspective, what are the trends that are likely to govern that? What are the challenges, or what are the areas where you see a lot of shifts and trends and movements from a workforce perspective?
Is that to me or Mr. Thammaiah?
Yeah, Anirban.
Oh, okay. All right. I think on behalf of everybody who's working, I can say we're all tired. I think we're all exhausted with everything over the last year. I think human beings are a tricky lot to predict. You can predict how potentially organizations will behave, but trying to predict how workforces behave, I think, is a whole new ball game. I honestly believe, and I was talking about this earlier, right? There is a certain amount of pent up frustration in the system. There is a certain amount of burnout in the system. And as I look at it, I think the next, whether you call it 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, I think you will see churn. Right? You will see churn because as human beings, when we go through stress, one way to deal with stress is try to change something. And you can't change where you live, you can't change who you're married to, you can't change the kids that you have. The job's the simplest thing to change, right? And but all jokes apart, I mean, and think of it, right? When we ourselves have gone through personal turmoil, a job shift seems like an answer, right? And I don't want to paint a picture of negativity all the way around, but I honestly, and when I talk to clients, I hear them extremely concerned about the churn rates that they're seeing in their workforce. It's easy to externalize it to say that's increased demand, but if employees were comfortable, happy in where they were, they wouldn't be going after that demand, right? So I think that is one. It may not be very long term, but I think short to medium term we will see that degree of churn that will steep into the organization. I think the other thing, as I look at the workforce, and I don't know whether all of you've seen it as well. I think the slightly older workforce is reevaluating their choices of careers. I think they're looking at whether this is what they want to do for a long periods of time, or are there potentially quote unquote less stressful career options that are available. The virtual work environment, like Mr. Thammaiah says, opens up a global market. If I have to do this, should I just do this for myself? There are these macro shifts you will see, right? I honestly think that the large employers potentially have a bigger battle on their hand in being able to attract and retain the workforce than the smaller, more nimble ones that could show they care, stuff like that. But I think within that also there will be employees who are going to decide on or pass a verdict on how their organization reacted with their feet more than anything else. Right, we are not in an environment where growth in the market isn't available. There are enough organizations setting up shop in India, enough organizations expanding business in India. So I honestly believe the workforce, whether you as an organization did the right thing or not, your workforce will tell you with their feet, right? And that's something at one end to be very proud of if you got it right, and the other end to be very scared of if you got it wrong.
Absolutely. Mr. Thammaiah, I'll come to you
Yeah,
with some
thanks.
questions.
So I think one of the things I would want to kind of on the outset pick up is take a couple of steps back and see from outside in and look at IT and related areas, like along with many other verticals that exist in the industry. And possibly, I would say IT enjoys possibly at its crux a little more flexibility if they choose to have, right? And possibly a little younger workforce and attraction as an industry is certain aspects which possibly is given so far, and possibly it can be made sustainable if there are slight changes happens. But the point I'm trying to make here is possibly it is very attractive compared to some of the career options which a young person would want to choose, saying if there is another pandemic, god forbid it's not there, but any other kind of discontinuity, they would like to possibly have a work which they can do from home, need not exactly travel, uh, be at a place and work, like maybe a logistics company or something like that, right? So the attractiveness is high. But at the same time, now going within the IT industry and enable, I would say the stickiness of the employee is a little bit question mark. That's where I would agree with the churn, uh, thought process which Anirban has been. The stickiness of the employees is something like, if you look at how even the hiring is happening today, the touch and feel is gone. If there is, the whole process of hiring at some point required the employee to walk in into an office, meet up with a, to start with a receptionist, walk in, then there are people, then you would walk by the HR bay, and even after joining, there would be somebody saying hello, who is not scheduled to say hello on a Teams meeting or some other place, but he's just, those water cooler moments. We are underestimating the importance of that, and that is what brings the stickiness, because those are the intangible things. People surprisingly work longer because they find employees more nicer in a workplace or certain other aspects. So how do you bring that niceties, random niceties onto a video call? It's not possible. It's simply not possible. So the stickiness and the committedness of an employee to say, let me spend a little more time here and see what this place holds for me more, might be missing unless we find a quick answer for that. And it's not an easy puzzle to solve, because more so it's not a process, it's human, and anything that got to do with human is, I mean, either easy or it's not very easy, right? So the stickiness is an issue, and I think we need to brace up for that. That's one bit. And I think the last bit I want to say, Aniket, here is, I think it would help everybody, employees as well as the employers, to possibly choose a certain mindset. There was a time when we said growth mindset. This is something which we need. Every organization said, how do we get growth mindset into it? We're still there. We still need growth. We still need a lot of profits. We need a lot of advancement in technology. But I think we also need, for this race which we are going through, we as employers also need to have that mindset, which is a mix of a few things, which is adaptability, resilience, empathy, and collaboration, and possibly coming along with resilience is hope. I think if this is the mindset, we walk into it and also say, okay, let's take each day at a time, each year at a time, each quarter at a time, and most importantly, each day at a time. I think that makes it easy for the employee. My advice to the employees would be that take a day at a time, work and trust your management, be open, share, because I can say that management sometimes are equally or more lost as to what's the next step. And this is the time employees need to speak up, because then the decision makers have more data, to real-time data, to take human decisions, right? So there is a role which an employee also to add to, very importantly, play here, and not just think it's the boss's job to take the decision. They are very much part of the decision, and I think we all can, that way employees can make the entire industry, IT industry, better that way. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was a very, very interesting conversation. We really enjoyed talking to both of you. And just because we have a couple of more minutes, I just have one quick question, just because I have both of you on the call. And that is more in terms of, what is your perception in terms of the hub and spoke model that now everyone is talking about, in terms of, the workforce being distributed now, and many of those don't really want to come back in a certain way, and organizations would like to have some kind of a, physical setup where organized employees can connect and have, a basic level of infrastructure, be it technological or physical, and also, kind of have a physical setup in place. So do you see that resulting in a much wider adoption of hub and spoke models with smaller offices spread across the geography? I mean, what's your outlook on that? Both of you, I mean.
Yeah, I can go first. I think if you look at if you look at sociology, teams above a certain size don't work well together. Right, and if that gets you to a point where you've got teams that are a lot more manageable, smaller teams coming together to bond, that will work. Right, I think there is enough science behind that to say put small teams together, they're going to go to work, go work wonders. The trick to that is how often can you get them in, right? Because what you'll have to balance is that need to say I acknowledge your flexibility requirements, and therefore you choose how often you want to come in, versus I have a requirement to drive collaboration, drive innovation. That doesn't happen, like Mr. Thammaiah says, unless I argue with you, fight with you, then make up over a cup of coffee with you. That is very important to how humans decide things, build things. If we can balance that, I think the smaller workplace will be the one big takeaway from the pandemic, that you would have devolved back to a place where the team as a unit is manageable, can deliver outcomes, can deliver speed, can deliver all of that. It's about whether you get the journey right or not from here.
Sure. Mr. Thammaiah.
Yeah, I personally think it works. And the reason why I would say it is that's pretty much needed, and that's the way things would evolve uh, with the travel distances, time, and various other aspects and the advantages which it gives. I think the answers we need to find is, and possibly we don't have right now, is what are the new skills and new attitudes that is required to make it work. And that's the one issue is many of the changes we had time to observe and take part and make it happen. And this is something right now is happening at such a rush that we just don't have that learning curve to experiment, fail, and assimilate and all of that. But for the hub and spoke, I think that's something. My personal opinion, it would work, and companies who are very serious about it would have to figure out how to make it work more so from the employee perspective, because eventually I think with technology processes all other things can be made to fall in place. It's the human element which would take time because of the learning curve. I think yeah, I would say we should be game for it.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mr. Thammaiah, Anirban. Thank you so much for taking out the time today. It was a great interaction. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you, Aniket. Bye, neighbors.
Take care.
Bye.
Good day.